Alice's hands trembled as she slowly peeled the edges of the lottery ticket. The dull fluorescent lights above the small kitchen flickered in the background, casting an eerie glow over the faded table where she sat. It had been years since she'd played, decades even. Life had been more about survival than dreams of luxury. But today was different. She had felt a flutter of hope when she saw the advertisement in the local paper, the words "Jackpot Winner" boldly printed. On a whim, Alice had purchased a single ticket while grocery shopping, tucked it into her worn coat pocket, and forgot about it until now. The dull ache in her bones reminded her of all the years spent working hard just to scrape by. She hadn't even dared to dream of winning. But as she scratched the ticket, her heart skipped a beat. The numbers matched, one after another. Her hands froze. This wasn't possible. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and checked the numbers again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them were right. She had won. She had really won. It wasn't just a small prize, not a few dollars to cheer her up. No, this was the jackpot. A wave of disbelief swept over her. She had never imagined that the quiet, solitary life she'd been living could lead to something like this. Her pulse raced, her breath quickened. She sat back, eyes wide, trying to process the impossible. "Is this real?" she whispered to herself, almost as if speaking aloud could confirm it. The silence around her was deafening, the kind of silence that screamed doubt. The phone in her hand felt heavy as she shakily dialed the casino's number, the one printed on the back of the ticket. She was only half listening to the automated message, her mind racing ahead, imagining what she could do with the money. A new life. Security. Peace. Finally, a voice crackled through the line. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" Alice's voice was barely audible, tight with nervous excitement. I think I've won the lottery. The jackpot. The big one." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by an almost dismissive chuckle. "Oh, I see. Would you please provide the ticket number so we can verify it?" Alice did as instructed, heart hammering in her chest. She held her breath as the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then came the response. "I'm terribly sorry, but there seems to be some issue. We're unable to verify your win at this time. We'll need to investigate further." Her heart sank, the excitement drained from her, leaving a hollow ache. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could this be happening? She had followed the rules, done everything right. And yet, the casino, the one she had trusted, was now doubting her claim. But Alice wasn't the kind of woman who gave up easily. She had fought battles before, survived the hardest moments life had thrown at her, and this was no different. Her voice was steady, though the anger simmered beneath it. "What do you mean you can't verify it? It's right here. I've won. And I want my prize." Another pause, followed by a clipped response. "I'm afraid that we need more time to investigate. Please don't contact us again until we have concluded our review." The call ended abruptly, and Alice sat there in stunned silence, staring at the ticket in her hand. The disbelief began to melt away, replaced by a cold, determined resolve. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't going away. She had earned it, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. She stood up from the table, the weight of the ticket now heavier than ever. This was only the beginning. If the casino thought they could sweep this under the rug, they had another thing coming. The fight had just begun. Alice woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose that had replaced the confusion from the night before. The sunlight barely pierced through the heavy curtains of her small apartment, casting a muted glow over the room. But it didn't matter. In the past, when things felt impossible, she would have hesitated, second-guessed herself. Not today. Today she had a plan. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number of her old colleague, Mark, a lawyer she had worked with years ago. She had to act quickly. Time was not on her side. The longer the casino delayed, the harder it would be to get answers. "Mark, it's Alice," she said, trying to steady her voice as she paced around the room. "I need your help. I've won the lottery, but the casino won't pay me. They're claiming there's a problem with my ticket." There was a pause on the other end. Alice could practically hear Mark's mind racing as he processed what she was saying. Finally, his voice came back, cautious but intrigued. "A lottery win? That's huge, Alice. But if they're refusing to pay, there's got to be more to this. I'll help, but I need to understand exactly what happened. Let's meet." Within the hour, Alice was sitting across from Mark in a small, dimly lit cafe, her fingers still gripping the ticket like it might vanish into thin air if she let go. Mark listened intently, his brow furrowed as she recounted the phone call with the casino. "Something doesn't add up," he said, tapping his pen against the table. The casino's story doesn't make sense. If they're refusing to pay, it's either incompetence or fraud. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but we need to dig deeper. Alice's stomach twisted with a sense of dread. I don't understand. Why would they lie? It's a simple win, just like they advertise. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Alice, casinos like this are not in the business of handing out jackpots unless they absolutely have to. If there's a discrepancy, they'll find a way to make it disappear. It's about controlling the odds. But this could be bigger than we think. They agreed to start by filing a formal complaint, but Alice wasn't satisfied with just that. No, she needed more. She needed the truth, the kind of truth that the casino's polished facade was trying to hide. As Alice walked back to her apartment, the weight of the task ahead began to settle in. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She pulled it out, seeing an unfamiliar number on the screen. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello, Alice Thomas? A deep voice on the other end. I have information you might find interesting. Her heart skipped a beat. Who is this? Someone who knows the casino very well, the voice continued, lowering to a whisper. You're not the only one they've wronged. They've been doing this for years. The problem is, no one has had the guts to expose them. Alice's pulse quickened. How do you know all this? I have sources, let's just say. You'll need more than just a lawyer. You need the truth, and I can help you find it. The call ended abruptly, leaving Alice holding her phone in a daze. The storm of uncertainty she had felt the night before was nothing compared to the whirlwind of questions now racing through her mind. Was this person trustworthy? How could she be sure? But there was no time to waste. Alice knew she couldn't back down. The road ahead was long, and it would require more than just legal action. It would require a full-scale investigation, a relentless pursuit of truth. And she was ready. The next few days passed in a blur of calls, emails, and visits to legal offices. Mark helped her get everything in order, but Alice felt the pressure mounting. Every moment she spent waiting felt like an eternity, but every time she thought about the casino's refusal to pay, anger surged inside her. They thought they could get away with it, but they were wrong. Late one night, Alice sat at her desk, poring over the paperwork. The numbers, the contracts, the fine print, it all seemed to twist and bend into something insidious. Something didn't line up. Then, in a tiny corner of one document, she found it, a clause that mentioned an unverifiable jackpot. Her breath caught in her throat. That was it. The ticket wasn't the problem. Their system was designed to reject wins like hers, to filter out any claims that threatened to empty their coffers. Alice sat back in her chair, a feeling of grim satisfaction spreading through her. The fraud wasn't just a random mistake. It was a system they had built, a system that relied on keeping people like her, like all the other victims, silenced and unheard. She couldn't let it go. She wouldn't. Alice stood up, determination hardening her every step. This was war. And this time, she wasn't going to fight it alone. The next day, Alice reached out to an investigative journalist she'd heard about, someone who had been digging into casino practices for years. If anyone could expose the truth, it was them. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, lies, and setbacks. But Alice Thomas wasn't about to let the casino win. Not now, not ever. The days dragged on as Alice dove deeper into her investigation. Every lead, every document, every call seemed to add more layers to the already complex web of deceit the casino had woven. But it also fueled her determination. She was no longer just a woman trying to claim her prize. She was a force set on exposing an empire built on lies. Mark was with her every step of the way, supporting her with legal expertise and helping her piece together the puzzle. But even his seasoned eyes couldn't find a direct way in. Every time they thought they were close, something new would block their path. One morning, as Alice sat in the small, cluttered office she had set up at her apartment, her phone rang. The caller ID was unfamiliar, but the urgency in her gut told her it was important. Hello, she answered, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Alice Thomas? The voice on the other end asked. I have the documents you're looking for. Her heart skipped a beat. Who is this? Doesn't matter, the voice said cryptically. What matters is I can help you take them down. Meet me tonight at the old warehouse on 5th and Elm. Come alone. The line went dead before Alice could respond, the phone going silent in her hand. Her mind raced. Who is this? Was this the person who could give her the final piece of the puzzle? The warehouse was far from safe territory, and the anonymity of the call only made her more anxious. She had no idea who she was about to meet, but something told her this was the breakthrough she'd been searching for. The night arrived with a thick blanket of fog, making the city seem even more oppressive. Alice's mind was a storm of thoughts, all conflicting and urgent. She kept replaying the conversation, trying to piece together any clue she might have missed, but the more she thought about it, the less certain she became. At the intersection of 5th and Elm, the dim lights from the street lamps barely lit the path to the old warehouse. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and boarded up. Alice hesitated for a moment, but the memory of her phone call, the promise of the documents that could destroy the casino, pushed her forward. As she entered, the cold, musty air hit her like a slap. She felt her way through the shadows, heart racing, eyes scanning every corner. The warehouse felt like a tomb, its silence deafening. The only sound was the echo of her footsteps on the cracked concrete floor. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the faint pool of light cast by a single overhead bulb. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood, but Alice could make out his features. Tall, with sharp eyes that seemed to glint even in the low light. He was holding a briefcase, one that seemed to radiate importance. "Are you Alice Thomas?" he asked, his voice rough but controlled. "Yes," Alice replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "You said you have the documents. What is this all about?" The man studied her for a moment, his gaze calculating. Then, without a word, he opened the briefcase and placed it on the table in front of her. Inside were a series of files, neatly arranged but with a sense of urgency. He slid them toward Alice. "This is everything you need," he said, his voice low. "The real reason they've been rejecting your claim. The evidence of the scam they've been running for years. They've been taking advantage of people like you. And they've been getting away with it." Alice's hands trembled as she opened the first file. Her eyes skimmed the documents, the information inside too explosive to fully comprehend at first glance. But as she read further, it became clear. The casino had been manipulating the lottery system, using a combination of technical glitches and human error to deny payouts. Worse, they had done it countless times before. Her stomach churned with a mixture of rage and disbelief. How could they have gotten away with this for so long? How many others had been victimized just like her? She looked up at the man, her voice steady despite the flood of emotions inside her. "Why are you helping me? What's in this for you?" The man's expression remained unreadable, but his voice softened slightly. "You're not the first person they've hurt, Alice. And you won't be the last unless someone stands up to them. I've seen the damage they've done. People like you deserve justice. I'm just doing what I can to make sure you get it." Alice studied him for a moment longer, her instincts telling her she could trust him. But there was still so much more to uncover. "What now?" she asked, her voice resolute. "Now," the man replied, "you take this information and you use it. There are people who will back you up, people who have seen the truth and are waiting for someone to expose it. But be careful, Alice. The casino won't let this go easily. You're going to face resistance, and it won't be pretty." Alice nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. She would take down the casino, expose their lies, and make sure no one else would fall victim to their corruption. With the briefcase in hand and a new sense of determination, Alice turned and left the warehouse, ready for the next step in her battle for justice. The following days were a blur of phone calls, legal meetings, and sleepless nights. Alice pored over the documents the mysterious man had given her, each page more damning than the last. It was one thing to suspect fraud, but it was entirely another to hold the hard proof in her hands. The casino had been using advanced algorithms to rig the lottery system, setting up a fake process to reject winners. Those who dared question their luck were dismissed with empty promises, while others simply disappeared without ever receiving their rightful winnings. But Alice wasn't like the others. She was prepared to fight, and she had the tools to do it. Her next step was clear. She needed to go public. The evidence had to be seen by the world. However, Alice was no fool. She knew that if she went directly to the media, the casino would have every resource at its disposal to discredit her. She needed to be strategic. She needed help from someone with a reputation for digging deep, someone who could take this story and run with it. That's when she thought of Sarah Barnes, an investigative journalist she had read about years ago. Sarah had a reputation for exposing corporate corruption and bringing down giants. If anyone could help Alice, it was Sarah. But would Sarah be willing to take on such a massive corporation? Alice reached out to Sarah, sending a carefully worded email with a brief summary of the case and a request to meet. She knew the journalist would be hesitant, so she didn't expect a quick reply. Days passed, and just as she was about to lose hope, her phone buzzed. A new email had arrived. "Meet me at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m., it said. "We'll discuss this further." The next day, Alice arrived at the cafe early, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been preparing for this meeting for weeks, but now that the moment had come, she felt uncertain. What if Sarah didn't believe her? What if Alice had made a mistake and was about to expose herself to even more danger? But when Sarah arrived, she didn't waste any time. The journalist was a woman in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with an air of quiet confidence that immediately put Alice at ease. She sat down across from Alice, glancing briefly at the folder Alice had brought with her. "I've read your email," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with a scandal of massive proportions. The casino industry is big, and it has a lot of influence. But it also has a lot of skeletons in its closet. Tell me everything." Alice took a deep breath and began to explain. She walked Sarah through the evidence, piece by piece, detailing how the casino had used technology and manipulation to prevent legitimate winners from collecting their prizes. She described the long battle she had faced, the court hearings, the rejection, and the frustration. As Alice spoke, Sarah's expression remained stoic, but her eyes never left Alice's face, as though she could see right through her. Once Alice had finished, Sarah remained silent for a long moment. She opened the folder Alice had given her, flipping through the documents, her gaze scanning the pages quickly but thoroughly. Alice could see her mind working, processing the data. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but there was a new intensity behind it. "This is huge," Sarah said, her tone shifting from one of caution to one of purpose. "This could bring down the entire casino system if it's handled right. But it won't be easy. You're not just taking on a casino, Alice. You're taking on a powerful corporation with connections everywhere. They have the money, the lawyers, and the PR machinery to bury this." "I know," Alice replied, her voice firm. "But I've come this far. I'm not backing down now. And I can't do it alone. That's why I'm here." Sarah nodded slowly, considering Alice's words. Then, with a sharp nod, she made her decision. "I'll help you," she said. "But we're going to have to move fast, and we're going to need to be smart about it. We'll need to gather more evidence, build a network of sources, and start planting the seeds of this story in the right places. I know people who can help. We can't just file a story and hope it sticks. We need to make sure the truth gets out, and that it can't be denied." Alice felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had taken a chance, and it had paid off. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Sarah would be her ally, and together, they would expose the casino's fraud for the world to see. But even as they made their plans, Alice knew the casino would be watching. They wouldn't let this go easily. The battle was only just beginning. That night, as Alice lay in bed, she couldn't help but replay the events of the day in her mind. She had come so far. But now, with Sarah's help, it felt like the fight had just reached a whole new level. Her phone buzzed with a new message. "We've got a lead," the text read. "Meet me at the cafe tomorrow at noon. It's time to take this to the next level." Alice's heart raced. There was no turning back now. The story was about to break wide open, and she would be at the center of it all. The next day, Alice and Sarah met at the cafe again, this time with a sense of urgency in the air. The usual clink of cups and quiet chatter around them felt distant as they focused solely on their mission. Alice couldn't shake the sense that things were accelerating faster than she had expected. Every moment felt more critical than the last. When Sarah arrived, her face was different, serious, focused. She didn't waste any time getting to the point. "There's someone inside the casino, someone high up, who's willing to talk," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "But we need to be careful. They're scared. They know what they're risking." Alice's heart skipped a beat. A whistleblower from within the casino? This could change everything. But she also understood the danger. If the casino caught wind of their investigation, they wouldn't hesitate to bury the truth. But for the first time in weeks, Alice allowed herself a flicker of hope. "Who is it?" Alice asked, leaning in closer. "It's someone from the legal department," Sarah continued. "They've been watching the same pattern of fraudulent activity you've uncovered, but they've been too afraid to speak out. They're afraid of losing everything. But now they want to help. They'll give us access to internal records and communications that will be hard to ignore." Alice nodded slowly, absorbing the information. It was a risk, but it was one she was willing to take. They were on the verge of exposing the truth, and this could be the breakthrough they needed. "How do we contact them?" Alice asked. "I'll make the arrangements," Sarah replied. "But we need to keep things quiet. One wrong move, and they could pull out. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, encrypted messages, and carefully planned encounters. Alice felt like she was walking a tightrope, balancing the need to expose the truth with the ever-present threat of being discovered. But with each passing day, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The internal records Sarah's contact provided were irrefutable. They showed how the casino had manipulated the lottery process, altering the results and using fake algorithms to justify their rejection of legitimate winners. They even uncovered a trail of money that led to several powerful individuals, figures who were untouchable by the law. Alice could hardly believe what she was seeing. The more she uncovered, the more disgusted she became by the sheer scale of the fraud. This wasn't just about her winnings anymore. It was about the countless victims who had been robbed of their dreams, the people who had been silenced by fear and intimidation. But now they had the evidence, and it was time to go public. Alice and Sarah sat down together, reviewing their strategy. The plan was simple but risky. They would leak the documents to a few trusted journalists, people who had a reputation for handling sensitive stories like this. They would also prepare a full report, exposing the casino's practices to the public, with a special emphasis on the individuals responsible for the fraud. The goal was to make the story too big to ignore, to create a wave of public outrage that would force the authorities to take action. As Sarah looked over the final drafts of the report, she seemed deep in thought. "This is it," she said quietly. "Once we release this, there's no turning back. The casino will fight back with everything they've got. We'll be under a microscope. Are you ready for this?" Alice hesitated for a moment. She had come so far, faced so much adversity, and the end was finally in sight. But there was a weight to this moment. This wasn't just about exposing the casino. It was about everything she had worked for, everything she had lost. It was about justice, for herself and for all the others who had been cheated. "I'm ready," Alice said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The next morning, the story broke. The journalists who had received the leaked documents began publishing their findings. Headlines screamed across the news. "Casino exposed for rigging lottery draws, millions of dollars stolen from customers in elaborate scam." The documents, which detailed the fraudulent practices and the names of the individuals involved, were splashed across the front pages of newspapers and websites. Social media exploded with outrage. People were furious. The casino's stock plummeted as investors panicked. But the real shock came when the casino's CEO was forced to issue a public apology. The company, under immense pressure, announced that it would cooperate fully with the authorities, but the damage was done. The public had spoken, and the truth had come out. Alice watched the events unfold from her living room, her heart racing. It was over. The truth was out, and the casino's empire was crumbling. But there was no time to celebrate. Alice knew that this victory was only the beginning. There was still work to be done. In the days that followed, Alice was contacted by dozens of victims of the casino's fraud, people who had been cheated out of their winnings and who now sought justice. With Sarah's help, Alice began organizing support for these individuals, creating a network where they could share their stories and fight for what was rightfully theirs. But Alice wasn't just focused on the past. She had a vision for the future. With the casino's power diminished, Alice started working on a new project, an organization to support victims of corporate fraud, to give them the legal tools and resources they needed to stand up to powerful corporations and fight for justice. The foundation became a symbol of hope for countless others, a beacon of light in a world where corporate greed often went unchecked. In the end, Alice's fight wasn't just about reclaiming her winnings. It was about something much bigger. It was about standing up to injustice, about giving a voice to the voiceless, and about showing that one person, no matter how small or powerless they may seem, could make a difference. And as Alice stood in front of her new foundation, looking out at the people whose lives she had touched, she realized something. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been silenced, ignored, or cheated. And it was just the beginning. The battle was far from over. But Alice was ready to keep fighting. Alice's journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The media storm around the casino scandal had died down, but the ripple effect continued. The public was still reeling, and the victims, those who had lost much more than just money, needed someone to lead them. Alice had unknowingly become a beacon of hope for those who had long been silenced by corporate giants. Her new foundation gained traction, and people from all corners of the country began reaching out for support. They weren't just asking for money, they wanted justice. They wanted to be heard, to be validated, and to make sure no one else would fall victim to the same corrupt practices. In the months that followed, Alice devoted herself entirely to her foundation. She started working closely with legal experts, advocates, and journalists to help the victims of corporate fraud navigate the complex legal systems that had often betrayed them. But despite the progress they were making, Alice knew the fight wasn't over. There were still powerful forces out there, ones that would do anything to keep the truth buried. And those forces were beginning to take notice. Late one evening, as Alice sat in her office, reviewing some case files, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was cold, calculated. "You think you've won, don't you, Alice?" the voice sneered. She sat up straight, her instincts immediately on alert. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice steady. "You've made a lot of noise, exposed the truth, and stirred up a lot of trouble. But you're just a pawn in a much bigger game. You think you're making a difference, but you're only scratching the surface." Alice's heart pounded in her chest. She recognized the voice now. It was someone from the casino, someone who had been at the top of the pyramid. The fact that they had reached out to her meant they were scared. But that also meant they were still dangerous. "I don't care what you think. I'm not backing down," Alice said firmly, her voice unwavering. "You can't intimidate me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then a low, almost amused chuckle. "We'll see about that. You'll learn soon enough that the real power lies with those who pull the strings behind the scenes. You're just a small player." Before Alice could respond, the call abruptly ended. She sat there for a moment, staring at the phone. The words echoed in her mind. The real power lies with those who pull the strings behind the scenes. She had exposed the casino's fraud, but she knew this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. If there was one thing she had learned from this entire ordeal, it was that the fight for justice was never easy, and it was never truly over. There would always be forces lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But Alice wasn't the type to back down. She had fought too hard to let it end now. She stood up, determined, and walked to her window. The city outside was bustling with life, but Alice's mind was already racing ahead, thinking about the next steps. She had to be strategic, stay ahead of the game, and continue to fight for the people who had put their trust in her. And so, Alice's fight for justice continued. The foundation grew stronger, her team expanded, and the victories started to pile up. She didn't just expose one casino, she exposed a system of corruption that spanned across industries across the country. The legal battles were grueling, but they were necessary. Alice had become a symbol of perseverance, a woman who had once been wronged and had refused to let that define her. But the phone call was a reminder. The war wasn't over. As long as there were powerful people hiding in the shadows, the fight would go on. And Alice was ready for whatever came next. Her journey was far from finished, and the stories of the people she had helped would continue to inspire others to rise up and demand the justice they deserved. Alice had found her purpose, and she wasn't stopping until every last injustice was exposed, every voice heard, and every wrong made right. The road ahead was long, but Alice was ready for the next chapter of her story, knowing that true victory wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about making sure the world was a little bit better, a little bit fairer for everyone.